So I'm delighted to speak to Graham Bandy today, and he's got a new book out called Nursing at the Front Line. And Graham, this is kind of a book with a bit of a difference because it's, in effect, somebody else's book, which you are the editor of and which you've brought to life after all
Mm.
these decades. So as you can see in the background behind Graham, he is a collector. He has a lot of stuff in his life, and it was stuff which got you going on this latest book, wasn't it? Do you want to tell us how you got the material for this latest book?
Yeah, sure. I do a lot of living history, or I used to pre-COVID. I started writing books then, but I used to go out with a big, huge tent and fill it with loads of medical equipment and panniers and basically a six-bedded area for patients, an operating area and a reception area, an assessment area. Used to take it out, explain to people, do talks, and it went down awfully well. And one day I was at some place which I've totally forgotten. A lot of water has gone under the bridge since then. And this lady came up to me and she started asking me lots of questions about stuff. I mean, it's quite usual that medically trained people come up to you and start trying to test you and trying to catch you out. Oh, I bet he doesn't know anything about that. Could you tell me what this is for? Well, yes, that's a mouth gag and it's for using anaesthetics, and this is a Schimmelbusch mask and etc. But anyway, she was talking to me about my knowledge and my background being a army nursing officer, which I still was at that time. And she was very interested. Then she sort of turned around, walked around a bit, and then came back and said, "I've been looking for someone like you for a very long time." I said, "Oh, that's very nice. Thank you very much." Um, she said, "My neighbour died and he always wanted his book published. And I think you're the person to do it." And I went, "Wow, right, okay, thank you very much. Could you come across to my house next week and I'll give you the stuff? But it's on the proviso, you get it published." I said, "Well, yeah, I'm sure I can do at some point." So I went across and I picked up two plastic bags full of paperwork, handwritten notes, a little bit of type stuff, an album full of photographs and paintings that he'd done, bits of ephemera, his paybook, what else did he get? His Geneva Cross, Geneva Conventions, identity card, all sorts of things. There was absolute stacks of stuff in there, and I didn't really take much notice. I thought, right, okay, I'll go through this when I've got 5 minutes. Unfortunately, that 5 minutes didn't come until 2019, which was about 10 to 15 years later. I totally lost track of it. I had moved umpteen times. I'd finished with the forces. I'd stopped nursing and I'd started a book on cap badges and uniform identification and dating, which you did a very kind review of in an earlier edition of Family Tree magazine. So I was trying to sort out all my boxes and stuff, and I came across these bags. By now, they're disintegrating, falling to bits. And I thought, oh, blimey, yeah, I remember this. I better get this out. And I started going through it. And as I started going through it, I thought, good grief, look at all this. This is absolutely stonking. This is a story that really needs to be told. So I gave Pen and Sword, my usual publisher, a call and spoke to my editor there. And I said, Tara, I've got this pile of stuff here. It's brilliant. It's a story of a bloke going all through North Africa, up into Italy. And then he does something really strange. He gets seconded to the Special Operations Executive. And of course, that's magic words at the moment, because lots of books about the Special Operations Executive. And of course, you've got all the Violet Sabo stuff and loads of stuff. But there's nothing really on what went on in Yugoslavia. There is one book by a chap called Major Lindsay Rogers called Guerrilla Surgeon. And he went out there and he did all this stuff. And that's the only really trace of it. I've got a stack of books back there on the SOE. And they just mention, oh, yes, Yugoslavia. Yes, we sent some agents in, we did this. And there's about 4 lines saying about Lindsay Rogers doing this other stuff. There's nothing about this hearts and minds, CivPol, civilian population stuff, CivPop, stuff that was going on with 281 Wing in Yugoslavia. It was amazing. So I thought, oh, blimey. So got very enthusiastic. They got very enthusiastic. So I spent time trying to put all the pieces together, trying to find out what went where, whom the pictures were of, and all the rest of it, and trying to decipher his handwriting. Which, as a nurse, having read lots of doctors' handwriting, I got quite used to reading.
So, Graham, can I just chip in to orientate people with what you're talking about? So we're talking here, it's about an RAF nursing orderly, isn't it? And
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Well, I was going to come to
yes.
that. Yes.
Oh well, I just so with the Second World War, it's a nursing orderly, and he gets called up in his late 30s, doesn't he? So he's kind
Mm,
of not the typical super young recruit.
no.
He does have some medical experience, and
Yes.
then his life, just as so many people's did, gets upended as he gets whisked away from his home life as an ARP, and those carrier bags which you had loitering around amongst your wonderful collection of military memorabilia, those carrier bags, they're basically his journal of
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
his years through the
Absolutely.
war, through North Africa, Yugoslavia, Italy, France, wasn't it? I think he covered a
He came
huge
back through
area.
France. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah. So
Yugoslavia.
just giving a bit of context so people know where
Sorry. Yeah.
we're at.
I was going
Yeah.
to come on to that.
Oh, sorry.
So basically, I started putting his life together. I found out he was born in London. He got married. What I didn't find out initially is that he had a child. I was told by this lady that he had no issue. There's no offspring, no nothing. So I wasn't looking for that. So I went built a family tree around him, found out where he was working, found him on the 1939 register, found out what he was doing there at a place called Hovinder's, and there were hairdressers sundrymen, as they were known as. And in 39, he started with the ARP, and he liked doing the medical stuff. So he got a load of first aid certificates. So when his number came up to be sort of signed up, he was sent to an RAF recruiting office, and he was given the option after him saying, "Oh, do you know anything about first aid?" He said, "Yeah, I've got loads of certificates." They said, "Oh, what? Off to the medical branch for you."
Yeah.
So he was sent off with all these potential nursing orderlies down to Sidmouth, where he was trained, and he passed with 98% flying colours, and he did really well. And they were known as the old dads because these were people they'd sort of caught up with who hadn't really been caught up with before, which is why he celebrated his birthday traveling into Tunisia. So anyway, he got shipped out with a mobile field hospital, which a lot of people think is quite a modern thing. They'll think of MASH, the television series, and it is quite like that. So he was shipped out. They landed at Alexandria. They went all across North Africa, followed the army up through all the Italians, capturing all the Germans, and they ended up in Tunis. And he ended up at this convent. And from there, he had lots of adventures around because they were backwards and forwards in North Africa. And then, of course, when the invasion of continental Europe started through Sicily, up through Italy, he was at Monte Cassino after the finish of the battle. They were taken up to do some help, but they were found they weren't needed in the end. But at that time, he'd been seconded to a Spitfire squadron, 72 squadron, and they had photo reconnaissance photos before, during, and after Monte Cassino, which they gave to him, which are now in the book. And these are unpublished photos. There's over 100 unpublished photos, and he was an accomplished artist as well. So all this was going on in his spare time, often by the light of a single hurricane lamp at night, because they had to, even then there were still a few German aircrafts doing tip and run raids. And all of a sudden, when the mobile field hospital was shut down, once they got into Italy, he was sent off to this Spitfire squadron, 72 squadron. And he was quite keen on history. He'd already picked up a load of pottery and sherds in Carthage, where they were, just outside Tunis. And he was really pleased to be actually, based on the field of Cannae, from the Carthaginian Wars, Rome and Carthage. And lots going on. He's writing all about it. He's very enthusiastic about it. And then all of a sudden, They say, right, okay, we're packing up, we're moving because the battle has moved on, and so the Spitfire squadron moving. So the Doctor and he were then on a sneaky beaky mission to go off to Yugoslavia. And they were attached to the Special Operations Executive. And there's very, very little written about them apart from the stuff by Major Lindsay Rogers. And he was over there looking after all the partisans and also all the civilians. They were doing a hearts and mind thing with the civilians there. He'd already been at an airbase in Italy, receiving all the partisan wounded that were being shipped out, and there was thousands of them coming through with all sorts of problems. Then they had babies coming through because they were trying to evacuate them out, excuse me, out of the way of the Germans. And I thought this story was absolutely brilliant. So what I did, I edited a little bit of it. He was a very religious man, but I only took out where he was quoting vast tracts of the Bible to compare what was going on and just shortened them somewhat, and then added a little commentary to tell people what was going on when certain things happened. One of the interesting things was looking for a South African pilot, but unfortunately, everything never matched up with what he wrote and the official documentation. Now, there was a total mismatch, so I've put that into the book and tried to explain as much as I can. But I had people in South Africa searching for him, and also it's been an absolute roller coaster ride doing it, to be quite honest.
Mm, mm. And so he was a religious man. It's very poignant. There's some bits. There's an EastEnder called George, and his insights to George and how he dealt with all the kind of the trials and tribulations of
Mm.
they had to deal with, the people they had to look after as nursing orderlies. That was really poignant. And you start off the book and you go, all the stories here, or this is what he says, all the stories related here are true, if not enjoyable. And that's definitely inevitable, isn't it? Like some of the topics are quite, they're definitely poignant, and it makes you the kind of the consistency with which they're having to deal with seriously wounded and dying people who are young.
Mm.
Just it's a kind of it's kind of a foil. You've got these beautiful drawings that he's done and beautiful illustrations, and you've got his collections of pottery, the archaeology that he's finding, and he does beautiful drawings of those. So you've got, on the one hand, he looks as though he's like a gent on the Grand Tour, and on the other hand, you have his World War II experiences, and I love that insight into he's quite a remarkable character, isn't he? The way
Mm.
he is doing all of this, maybe to cope, or partly because he's just interested. Yeah.
I think it is a coping mechanism. I mean, there are several members of the field hospital that did actually die. One young lad died of meningitis. There were two others, dental officer and another chap, who were killed in a road accidents. It, they were losing them, not just the anonymous people that they didn't know, but the people around them were dying as well,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Um, and some of them have been very hard to track down. But I mean, I've managed to track down a few of them, so we can actually put them in the place. But George from Woolworth, what? He's God, I'd love to have met him and shook his hand as well. He was, he just seems like your best mate who is rough around the edges, but with a heart of gold. He was, yeah, I like George.
Mm. And just how the sort of person who can be that compassionate and kind of chipper in a very big-hearted way on somebody's deathbed is a very rare character, I think, isn't it?
Not so much in the services.
Really, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's happened.
yeah,
You because service people are prone to take the mickey, whatever situation you're in. And they will joke with you to try and cheer you up as well, as much as cheering themselves up. It's the military banter,
mm,
which to a lot of people may seem very obnoxious and insulting and rude, with lots of expletives inserted. But towards military personnel, it's just the way they operate a lot. And George exemplifies that sort of other rank, other airman who's the salt of the earth and carries, the weight of Atlas upon his shoulders lightly.
Mm,
I found.
mm,
I
mm.
actually found his surname and I found his family on the 39 register. And I found somebody on Ancestry who actually had him in the tree as a brick wall, but they weren't interested, unfortunately.
What a waste. Yeah.
I know, because I said I found him because I know who he is. I know what he did
Mm,
during the war. I know he's a lorry driver before the war and after. But I said, oh, I've got this person who's a brick wall. I said, well, I've got all this information. Would you like to know? Didn't answer. It's so
Basically,
sad.
yeah.
It's so sad. Because,
Hopefully the person will get back in touch. So Graham, from what you've been saying, that you just touched again about the wars of, or the Carthaginian wars or whatever. So you have a lot of military and medical knowledge over a huge span. So when you started working on these collection of these bags of goodies, and the kind of this journal through the Second World War, you had a lot of existing specialist knowledge, but did you still find yourself having to go off and research new things?
oh,
So that's
goodness.
half my question. The other half of my question is, to anybody, like if we are lucky enough to get given a bag of goodies, and it could be from a close relation, or it could be, as you are, you've got specialist knowledge, so
Hmm.
someone not related to you's approached you. So how do you go about, you've got these bags of things, where do you start? How do you make a plan? Or do you just explore them and see what happens? What do you do?
Well, I started off by exploring, going through, going, oh, wow, oh, look at these pictures. Oh, look at this. Oh, have you seen this? Have you seen this? Oh, goodness gracious. And being really enthused about it. I then had to sort it into some sort of order because it was totally higgledy-piggledy. It was all over the shop, nothing matched, and I had to spend weeks matching up sentences on one page to a page that was about. And, when I say plastic carrier bags, they're more like the big shopping bags that you get from Sainsbury's and stuff, those big orange ones with elephants.
Mm, mm,
Those things, it was full.
mm,
Trying to dig your way through because some of it was repeated. There were a few, about half a dozen pages that had been typed up but didn't really fit in anywhere. And then there was a little folder with some other bits in which didn't match anything else. And it was trying to put everything together. Once I'd spent all the weeks putting it all together and finding it, it was then the case of trying to find who these people were. So I thought, well, who's Harold? Who's Harry Scrayfield? Who is Scray? So I built up a family tree around him with his brothers and sisters, his mother and father, all the way through with his wife, the marriage. And then, surprise, surprise, I found the birth of a daughter. This was denied right at the beginning. Oh, no, he had no children. But there she was. And then I noticed in very tiny writing on some of the aerograms that were sent out to Joan. I thought, who's Joan? But it was this daughter.
mm,
Then I had to find out about some of the people that, because there's letters from family members who have lost or had patients pass through Harry's Scray's hand, which I wanted to know about. One of them proved an absolute nightmare. I had people in South Africa looking at all the records that they'd got. From the way Scray wrote it, he was in Yugoslavia. An aeroplane crashed. They brought this chap out from the South African Air Force, a Michael Ducken, and they looked after him, but sadly he died.
mm.
You go onto the Commonwealth War graves. He had a forced landing in Florence at the airport, and he died of his injuries, and he's buried in Italy. Looking at everything else, the letter that I've got was from his mother to Scray. There's lots of information in there. The sisters mentioned, and it all fits together with this Michael Ducken. And it's to a family called Ducken. I had my South African chums digging around for the actual place where it was, and we found everything where it was, where the farmstead was. But nothing actually, I couldn't get it to knit together. I couldn't get the two stories to knit,
Mm, mm.
which is why I put at the end, did he mismash a few of them together for the sake of privacy? Did he just misremember something or whatever? But that was an interesting search. But we did
Mm.
sort of find him, and we've put a name to him, and we've got something. Other things I had to consult were the Royal Air Force Medical Services in World War II. So I had to go all through all the paperwork and all these big tomes about them. And it actually clarified a few things, like right at the beginning, where he went off to a godforsaken airfield. We could name that airfield then.
Mm.
And then I could actually say the actual dates that he went out. And it was, I was like, well, I think Scrame might have misremembered this bit, but it was this, and they were issued kit, and off they went. So it's been a big dig through using a lot of resources, the usual genealogical resources, and a few, off tangent ones that I thought of. Excuse me, to try and actually pin down a lot of what was going on. I managed to find his nursing sister, Dame Veronica Ashcroft, which she became, which was great. So there's a lot of interest to RAF nursing in this, as well as general nursing and general war history. But it's a story that's not really been told. So I had to dig, and I had to find, and a lot of it was quite difficult trying to actually get any semblance of real records for some of these places.
Graham, I've just got one last question, and I'd like to kind of, because I think it would appeal to both bits of your head. So, can you just give us a flavour of what it would be like to work in a mobile field hospital in this period of the second half of the Second World War? So, what sort of equipment might they have? Particularly thinking of it from Scray's point of view, from that period and the places where he worked. Like, what was it like? And, how many people would it comprise? And just general flavour. He gets up in the morning, or whatever time he gets up to work, or whatever he's done. And what happens through his day?
Well, he was, it was he was a leading aircraftsman, so he didn't want to be any promotion from there because he liked being with the patients. Yep, I can identify with that. He'd get up, he'd have breakfast. He would go, if the ward had been set up and they were actually sort of encamped somewhere, he would get up, go into the ward, do the ward rounds, deal with the patients, temperatures, pulse, respiration, TPR charts, all of that normal stuff that you would see in hospitals today. He would then change any dressings. I mean, it was basically just, he's what in the old days would have been called a state enrolled nurse sort of level. He wasn't quite the registered nurse level, but he was highly efficient and highly trained. So he got on with a lot of stuff. And usually he was in charge. So he would deal with that, because there were only two nursing sisters in the entire hospital out of about 150, 200 staff, plus 150 to 250, I think they were about then. You would recognise more or less anything you saw in there. They had a dental department, they had X-ray, they had surgical wards, they had operating theatres, they had gas and air. It wasn't just the equipment has changed somewhat. It wasn't very different at all, to be quite honest. Then he'd have his lunch hour, come back and finish his shift. If he was on nights, he was normally in charge of the ward. They weren't expected to call the doctors because they were expected to deal with themselves because they knew what to do. And they knew how to handle emergencies. Sometimes they get crashed out to deal with emergency cases, but what normally came in was semi-stabilised patients in ambulances, either from the front or from general illness. It was just like a normal general hospital, but intense, or in the convent sort of thing. So that's what they did. Even when they went to Yugoslavia, they were still dealing with primary care stuff, with all the kiddies, giving inoculations, feeding them. It's absolutely marvellous. But it is the same, but just a bit different to today. Not so many bleeping machines and flashing lights and all sorts of Gucci equipment you get now, but a nurse from today would be able to go back there and recognise what was going on and be able to do the same stuff. Likewise, a nurse from then would be able to come forward, and once they'd adapted to all the beeps and flashing lights, they'd be fine, because nothing much changes. They had antibiotics by then. Penicillin was about. um, and the other tablets that are in there that I mentioned that actually saved Churchill from the bronchopneumonia. Um, X-rays had been in the use in the British forces since the 1890s. They took 5 X-ray machines to the Battle of Omdurman in 1896.
Yeah.
5
Mm.
portable X-ray machines. They were being used. In the First World War, they had Paget's Massage Corps, which became the Chartered Institute of Physiotherapists. It's the stuff was there, but
Yeah.
sometimes it was called different things, and it wasn't as refined as it is today, perhaps. But that's what would happen. And at night, he would sit there doing his little paintings by his hurricane lamp, dealing with any patients needing bedpans, etc., just like a normal night shift you'd
Mm.
get today.
Mm.
Yeah, it's recognisable, and it will be recognisable both ways.
Thank you. So it's a really readable, enjoyable book, and
Thank you.
it's got lots of kind of vignettes, I guess is the best way of saying it, hasn't it? So
Mm.
it does whisk you around to lots of different places. So anybody who enjoys, because you have Graham's commentary in italics going through the work as well. So it's like having Graham sitting next to you going, so this means this, and this is interesting because that. So it's good fun, even though it's someone else's work, but it's very much got Graham's take on it. So it's available from Pen and Sword, isn't it?
Yes, in
Yes,
February,
in February.
on the
Yes,
18th of February.
yes. And Graham, so I guess I had a last question, but my last question is: out of all of the things you found out, was there one thing that you particularly loved, or just you loved it for the quirkiness, or you loved it because you just didn't know it, or you loved it because it's something which resonated with you with your army medical experience? Is there one thing which really chimed with you particularly when looking through your bags of stuff?
The lot, because he enjoyed archaeological stuff. I mean, I've been out on digs. I've been with the Services Archaeological Association. I've been out doing stuff, digging holes in ground. So yeah, that resonated. Um, Camaraderie um, of the place. This rough-hewn crim called George Harrop in the next bed to him, not worrying about leaving all his money lying around,
Mm,
even though he'd been arrested and spent some time in prison. No worries there at all because everyone's there for each other. So the camaraderie was there. Um, they're having to deal with stuff of all sorts of variants, bits and bobs. Yeah, that's been there, been there. And it was a story that needed to be told. So it came to me. My take is that this is a story of a chap who's sort of an everyman who was but doing medical stuff and did some very interesting medical stuff, i.e., SOE. But it's a story that isn't told. It's not out there. That so I felt that this was something that needed to be out there. It's needed to be shared. He needed to be remembered. A couple of weeks ago, I went to Kema, where he retired to in near Hassocks in West Sussex, and tried to find him. I found the house, found his bungalow, but
mm,
couldn't find him because they couldn't find the burial plot for him. So,
mm,
which
mm.
is sad, but we spent quite a bit of time bimbling around the churchyard trying to find him because I've got a burial record to say he was buried at Kema. So it's a bit sad not being able to find him, but they are looking for him still at this moment. So fingers crossed we will find him and Marjorie and his wife. Um,
Mm,
we had to sort of tip our caps at them.
mm, mm,
But yeah, it's just it's, a, it's just this everything. He just oh yeah yeah I sort of understand that. Oh, I understand that. Yeah. Oh blimey, yeah yeah I can relate to that bit.
mm,
Um, it's it is a story. It's poignant, but there are some jolly bits in between. And there's one jolly bit which isn't quite so much of a jolly bit. If you remember the bit where they ran out of space and had to, before they went off night day duty, before the night staff came on, they had
Well,
to.
I don't. I remember the bit where it was saying about who hasn't washed their socks, and
Ah,
then
yes,
thing on.
on
I
the
don't.
dead German graves
Yes,
when they were
yes,
only buried sort of about 4 inches below where they were sleeping.
yes. Yeah, you've
Yeah.
got to have quite a steely mind, haven't you, to cope with
But
that?
yeah, but yeah, that's service humour.
Yes.
Make the best of a bad situation. Take the mickey out of it and move on if you can.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Graham. Thank you so much for your time, giving us
Thank you.
insight to the book that we can look forward to. And as I say, it's out from Pen and Sword, but not until next February.
Yeah,
Yeah.
next February, February the 18th, I think it is.